All right, I want to welcome everybody to today's NASCA webinar exploring how state conservation agencies are working with conservation district state associations on policy development and alignment. This webinar will be recorded. It'll be available on NASCA's website after today on our YouTube page. This is the first of two webinars planned to explore how state policy efforts. We're grateful to be working with the Association of Conservation Executive Directors on this series. The second webinar is planned for January 22nd, and that will focus on legislative outreach. We have two strong states with us today, and we're excited to hear from the rest of you attending this. It'll last 60 minutes, and there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end. Please save your questions for the end, but feel free to enter those into the chat or anything else you want to add throughout. I want to remind everyone to stay muted during presentations. And let me introduce today's speakers, and then I'm going to hand it off. David Williams is the director of the North Carolina Division of Soil and Water Conservation. He's served in various capacities in the division since 1998. David also serves as NASCA's Southeast Regional Director. And Brian Evans is the executive director for the North Carolina Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts. Brian is also the president of the Association of Conservation Executive Directors. And then from Texas, Heather Bounds is a government relations specialist with the Texas State Soil and Water Conservation Board. Heather serves on the NASCA Policy Committee, and with her, Tamara Daniel serves as the executive director for the Association of Texas Soil and Water Conservation Districts. Prior to that, Tamara served as NACD's South Central Region Rep. So I'm going to hand things off to David and Brian, and they can talk a little bit about the work they're doing in North Carolina.
Well, thank you, Mike. It's good to be with everyone today. I appreciate NASCA's invitation to allow us to participate in this, and I look forward to learning a lot as well in this time together. Just going to talk a little bit about North Carolina from the process of how we go about getting our policy developed and from where we carry it from there, and then how we use it here in North Carolina to benefit us in the future as well. So we are, through our association, we are a 501c3, and we operate through the resolution process in developing our policies. And that is usually introduced from a local district, moves up through our area. There are 8 areas across our state. And from that, with that support, it moves on to our annual meeting. We meet once a year as a body within our association. At that point, that's where all of our policies are discussed and adopted, critiqued, changed, or done away with. And so we rely very heavily on our local soil and water districts to drive a lot of our policy. Some of the influencers that we've had in the past in developing our policy or things that have come up throughout the year. One most recent was a partisanship bill that was introduced in our General Assembly to make all boards and all elected boards become a partisan board. In North Carolina, our soil and water boards are nonpartisan, and realizing that that was something that we believe truly in, that our soil and water district should not function in a partisan manner. So that what happened when that came up, we realized that we did not technically have an official policy in place on that. So we initiated the start of getting that policy into our policy document. Several other things that have arisen, and we use our resolution process pretty heartily by encouraging districts, if there's a problem, there needs to be a policy associated with it so we can get it addressed. So what happens is once our policies are adopted at our annual meeting, they go into our official document we call our policies, position, and action items, which then pretty much becomes my work plan for the year. We have 8 standing committees throughout our state and within our association. And each one of these standing committees may have specific policy that affects the particular committee they are on. Probably one of the more active policy committees is our legislative committee, obviously. And it's we find out it's very important, to have a relationship with legislators when we're trying to influence policy, when we're trying to get policy adopted, or trying to address policy that's been introduced by somebody else. And we do typically, I register as a lobbyist to be able to advocate on behalf of our association. And we are a 501(c)(3). And when I first took my position about 8 years ago, we pretty much had the association had the understanding that as a 501(c)(3), and they could not be actively engaged in lobbying, which we realized that was not the case through some consultation with a nonprofit engineer, nonprofit attorney. And so we do register to make sure we have a presence in the General Assembly, because as we develop policy, we can send it on to our contacts over there. But having someone that can be there face to face to talk on its behalf is pretty tremendous as well. And we found that we get a lot better direction on that. And we have had cases in the past where we've introduced policy changes or introduced legislation that got approved, but the wording when it finally got approved was not exactly what we were asking for. In some cases, it made it a little more difficult to deal with than not having the policy at all. So again, just knowing that, we can have a voice there to talk through our policy, especially if it reaches the legislative part of what we're doing through our policies is very important. Now, not all our policies are legislative in nature. We develop policies that direct our association, direct the relationship that we have with the partners in North Carolina as well. And it's very important to get it into that policy document, because once we get it there, we can take action without having to have full body meetings. So we've got a stance on it. And that's probably one of the most beneficial things our policy does for me as executive director. It allows me to speak on behalf of the association once we've got consensus that it is the stance that the association wants to take. We use our policy process also to influence national policy. Our relationship with NACD and the resolution process there has been very positive. We run into some issues. It wasn't really localized, but it was affecting us, where with CRP contracts, we are a CREP state. We have the enhanced CRP program here in North Carolina. And when we found out when FSA was sending out notifications that the CRP contract was over, some landowners were taking that to mean that they could just do what they wanted to. However, with the CREP easement on top of it, we realized there were more restrictions as well. So again, adopting that policy to make sure that that we understand that there's an issue and have it documented, so it doesn't get lost, it doesn't fall off the table in coming years, because we have found out that just because something comes up and goes away, it doesn't mean it won't come up again. And we do rely very heavily on our state partner. David and I have worked together 30 plus years probably now. And David is a very strong partner. Our department is a very strong partner too. And a lot of what we do wouldn't be possible without their influence on their side as well. So with that, David, I'll turn it over to you. You can talk a little bit about the state involvement.
Yeah, well, thanks, Brian. And let me begin by saying, as Brian said, we do have a wonderful relationship with our state association. And part of that is because of Brian's long history as a district employee, and before he retired and became the executive director for the association, and now executive director for the ACID group that he leads. And but we have I guess our state association got an executive director about what, 10 or 12 years ago, Brian. I'm trying to remember exactly when it was that started, but up until that time, the division provided all of the support for our state association, and as things evolved, the association was growing and getting more involved in things, and they needed to provide its own leadership, and so we supported that. We actually we took one of the position that had been providing support for the association and made it our deputy director position, which I assumed that position when it was formed, and then we led a contract to the state association. It started out at $30,000 a year, and now I think we pay $40,000 a year to the association to support the things that they do that support our overall effort to engage districts and district supervisors particularly. That contract provides financing to the association to help put on the annual meeting, the area meetings, and training. It's got a lot to do with training for district supervisors and districts, which in North Carolina, we have a requirement that has taken effect in the last 6 years or so, that all district supervisors are required to get 6 hours of continuing education credits per term. And so we make sure through our contract with the association that at the annual meeting, at the area meetings, and then at other training events, that they are providing the training services that we can give credit to the district supervisors for participating in. And that relationship has worked out extremely well for us. When Brian started and when his predecessor started, I made the point to tell them that the way I viewed our relationship was that Brian should consider my staff to be his staff, and I should consider him to be my staff. And that is the attitude we've had, and it has worked extremely well over this time. One of the things that Brian mentioned, the 8 standing committees, and we have at least one, in some cases, 2 staff people assigned to each of those standing committees from my division. And we also have at least 2 staff people assigned to support each of his areas, so that at the area level, we've got our division staff that are working to support the districts in that area and also to support the area meetings that go on, which again, as I mentioned, are a big part of our training effort. So our relationship has been extremely beneficial to us. We've been very pleased with the relationship. As Brian mentioned, they are able to do some advocacy work for us that has been tremendous. As you know, not all of us are the same in NASCA, but we're part of our state Department of Agriculture. And we work with our state association to kind of put together our legislative priorities for the year. But once we kind of figure out what we need, my division takes one direction, is to go through our department to get our initiatives recognized there, but we also rely on the association to advocate on the other side. And so even though I may not be able to get things all my priorities to be priorities for our department, the association can still advocate for those priorities, even though I may not be able to. And so that has really yielded benefits for us in the resources standpoint. We're going to be with the issues with Hurricane Helene that has really whacked our state, the western part of the state. We are already working on our strategy for getting the resources that we're going to need from both the state and federal agencies to support our remediation and recovery efforts there. And it's going to be huge. Matter of fact, it's going to be so huge that it keeps me awake at night, because that's going to be a lot of effort that goes into that. So there's a lot of work ahead of us. But I think Mike and Brian, I don't know if you want to add anything else back in addition to what I've said, but it's just been as I would say, again, our relationship has been wonderful, but in large part, that's because of the people that have been involved. Brian and his predecessor, the first association executive director was an NRCS retiree. When they retired from NRCS, they came to work for the division as a contract person, and then they transitioned over to the association. And then when he retired again, they brought in another person who stayed about a year, and she did not have the district background that Brian has, and that Dick Fowler, who was our first executive director, did not have that same connection with districts. And so that was a little more problematic. But Brian, with his long-term service in districts, and also leadership in the District Employees Association, were huge in terms of the relationships that we already had established and have been able to continue to work together well. And I would say that has been a key, just that long-term association, even before the executive director took that role. And so we understand each other, and we understand the value that each of us brings and how we can help complement the activities of one another in the ways that are beneficial to our partnership. So, Brian, I don't know if you want to add anything else, or if not, Micah, I think that's all we wanted to share at this point. So,
fantastic. Again, I remind everybody on this call, start thinking about questions. After this next set of presenters, we'll open it up, but feel free to drop questions in the chat at any time. So thanks
so Michael, let me make sure
Yeah.
Brian didn't want to rebut anything I said. So.
No, agree 100%. Thank you.
Well,
Okay.
let's shift to Heather and Tamara and talk a little bit about their relationship in Texas.
Great. Thanks, Mike. And also, really thanks to North Carolina. I sit and listen, and there's so many similarities. And when I first got the email from Mike about hopping on this Zoom today and talking about our relationship in Texas, my first thought was, what's the catch, Mike? I mean, I literally emailed him exactly what are you wanting, because I could not imagine doing my job without that close working relationship, the daily community, the things that y'all just touched on. So, we got into, explained a little more of where we were going, that kind of thing. A lot of similarities again between Texas and North Carolina. Obviously, with one of the bigger differences, our agency is independent. I'll let Heather get into that stuff, but they're charged statutorily with holding the state meeting. So they hold this annual state meeting, but I cannot tell you how strong that partnership is. There's no planning that moves forward without talking to us, speakers, breakout sessions, when our sessions are, all of those different things. And also coming up at our annual state meeting, we do have a resolutions process where obviously we meet annually, we go through the process, very similar type thing. But one of the things that we really try to do, as soon as those resolutions start coming in, anything that deals with the state board, with our state agency, I'm giving them copies immediately. And we are, as soon as that they, hit the computer, we're talking about how are we addressing these needs? What can we do? Is there something we can do before we ever even get to the state meeting? Are there things that we can be able to stand up and say, hey, we've already addressed this for you. And, there are obviously legislative and policy things that have to wait for that to play out, but kind of depending on what it is. The other thing that we try to do and work with the districts is when those resolutions come in working with them is not hamstringing the state agency or for somebody to pull up a resolution that says, no, the agency's asked for $50 million for flood control, but your association said you only needed 30. Of making sure that those things are out there and in the public and in a bay that really suits them, of just saying, we need more funding for flood control structures. Those types of policies and things like that. Very similar thing, the state has requirements for training. We also hold our district director training where, again, hand in hand, they're doing their part to meet their their state requirements, excuse me. And we're working with them on making sure that districts understand the roles and responsibilities and functions of the association. And again, I think y'all both also kind of touched on, there are things that they can do and there's things that we can do. And of working together, make sure that it's really the soil and water conservations districts that come out as the winners in the end. But not just that, but just the citizens of Texas when it's improved conservation, conservation on the ground, that kind of thing. We really kind of have, I guess you would say, the similar goals and objectives, and that's, the conservation delivery. One of the other things that we're very also good about, I actually attend their staff meetings. so that I can hear, what their staff are hearing, particularly their field staff when they're out there meeting with the districts on a monthly basis. We're small staffed there in our office. There's no way I can go out and meet with 216 soil and water conservation districts, even annually. And so, yes, wow. Keeping up with all of them some days is, and so, but we have them on our regular agenda so that they're coming in and talking to us and telling us what's going on. And I think one of the things that I probably am dancing around here is that we have our formal processes, but just as important is that informal, daily, regular communications of what are we hearing, what's going on, what do we need to address, how do we need to address this, whether it's something that's internal, whether it's something that's external that's going on in the legislative session. Hey, I talked to so-and-so today, I heard, there's going to be budgetary issue, whatever it is. But of keeping that, like I said, those constant, like I said, and I think that that's just as invaluable of anything is going over and sitting in a chair in Heather or John's office and saying, okay, this is what we need to talk about today. And again, going back to kind of what I opened of, really couldn't imagine how particularly from the association standpoint, that we could function without that good constant communication. Y'all touched a little bit on the federal level. It's the same way. I'm talking probably not daily within our SES, but at a minimum monthly. We have a monthly meeting. It'll be an hour or two where we will just sit and talk about everything, whether it's things that are working, things that are not working, policies, what's going on with, whether it's, y'all mentioned CRP and all of those different things. And it's really working with all of the partners in Texas, and that the better that we can communicate and stay ahead of issues that they arise, and really kind of tackling things before they become a big full-blown issue, or that we need formal policy of how can we address this and get it taken care of before it ever becomes, an issue, that kind of thing. So with that, I'll turn it over to Heather.
Couldn't find a mouse there for a minute. Thanks, Tamara. So I would hate to belabor the point and continue to repeat what the previous folks have said, but what I do want to bring about is I'm new to soil and water conservation, and I came from a completely different background. I've been here with the agency for about 18 months now, and it was kind of a trial by fire, standing in front of a fire hydrant on full blast and seeing what I absorbed, and how quickly I could take that information and turn it into a value proposition for the customers that we serve. And I think when it comes down to the brass tacks of what we do here, we've been a state agency since 1939. Like Tamara said, we serve 216 districts, but what we really do is we serve customers. And from that customer service perspective, it comes down to Tamara and John and I having a conversation about what's in the best interest and how do we go about that, and how are we going to divide up the work in order to make sure that we get the customer taken care of. And of course, our who our customers are, right? So, but also we work on a no surprises philosophy. And that comes strictly from we don't want to walk around the corner and Tamara go, oh my God, this just happened. But from hey, let's sit down and talk about this. I see something may be coming and we want to get ahead of it. And let's identify what we need there. So not to put too fine a point on everything, I feel like Tamara really touched on our relationship and how we work well together. And I think from that point, oh no, I do want to tell you one thing. So she talked about our annual meeting and the fact that our agency holds that, and we're going into that. This is the week that is preempting our annual meeting. So it is crazy in my office around here. But what we are doing, and what I've asked Tamara to help weigh in on, is a presentation on recruiting district directors. And that is going to be our breakout session on Tuesday following our general opening session. And it's going to be eye-opening It's going to be conversational, and Tamara was really helpful in advising me what the best would be to go about that so that I had the greatest impact on our customers. So if that gives you any indication as to how we work, that's how we do things here in the great state of Texas. So that's what I have for you, Mike.
Super. Well, I will open it up to folks for questions. I'm going to start off with one on something that Brian mentioned, kind of out of the gate, the partisan policy that you've implemented. Talk a little bit more about that. How do you maybe monitor that or enforcement? What are you looking for, and maybe a little bit more background on that one. I found that interesting.
Okay. Yeah. So the document that we produce every year out of our annual meeting that I said pretty much is my work plan. We not only put policies and action items in there, but we also put positions. When we come across something like this, we felt pretty comfortable in addressing that particular legislation, but we weren't sure, is it going to come up next year? Is it going to come up 3 years down the road? And by having it set up as a position that our association does not support our soil and water district supervisors being partisan, then like I said, we can take action from there. One thing I didn't mention was, we don't just develop policy necessarily at our annual meeting. We have to have measures in place because things pop up all during the year. And that's a lot of where our positions will come in, because the executive committee at that present time can meet mid-year or at any time and develop a position on any particular legislation, or anything that comes up, so we can move forward with it. But what we got in North Carolina right now, school boards and soil and water conservation district boards are the only two boards that are nonpartisan. And so the General Assembly has had some interest in making every board just be straight across the board, everybody partisan that way. We heard it was more focused maybe towards school boards. But again, it was just, we were just in the pot when they were looking at things to do. And it has come up in the past with a little bit of talk. Again, and talking to some of the legislators that I talked to, they said, well, we just feel like if somebody votes for someone, they need to know whether they're, what party affiliation they have. And so, we've made our point that party really should not play into conservation at all. And so that's the stance we have. And so far we've been able to have enough pushback on that. We've kind of warded it off. The last legislation actually was kind of interested in. The legislation said that each soil and water district board had the option to choose whether they wanted to be partisan or nonpartisan. If they wanted to be partisan, they didn't do anything; they just stayed nonpartisan, and they give them to the end of the year to do that. They could adopt a resolution or adopt an ordinance or of whatever to make them that way. And that, there was a little bit of solace in that for me, because that gave me an opportunity to work directly with soil and water boards if that were the legislation that passed, to say, you don't want to be part of a party because of. Whereas working with the General Assembly, it's a little bit harder to say, we don't want our people to work with a party because, we don't want to be necessarily critical of any party, just from our standpoint. So we feel like it's going to come up again. That's the reason it's good now. We have a position in our policy document. As soon as the legislation hits, we can go ahead and start our advocacy work to push back on it. That answer your question, Mike? A long
Absolutely.
answer. All right.
Quick question for Tamara. You mentioned you attend the state meetings, their staff meetings with the agency. You've been in your position for some time, a number of years. Was that in place when you started? Is that something that you helped to implement? How did that come to be?
No, it was not in place. Once I kind of came into the position, I guess you'd say more of a full-time type position, they have their staff meetings. They've actually made some changes to have them more frequently now, but they were having them the day before they have their board meeting. And so they were bringing in they bring in all of their field staff and everybody from all over the state. So when I say, I mean, it's everybody. And it kind of just happened. I know that sounds terrible, but it started with a, hey, can you come in and meet with our field staff so that we can go over X? And from there, it just kind of grew into, a kind of a regular occurrence, if that makes sense. It works well because I get a lot more pushback, feedback, all of the above, hey, we want to try this, or hey, we're asking districts to fill out this survey, or hey, we're whatever it is. And so their staff that are going out and meeting with the districts, at their regular monthly meetings, have a better idea what's going on. But also the feedback I get from them of, oh, hey, our districts have questions about X, are y'all going to be able to have this grant program again next year? What's going on with it? And so it actually really provides a good informal, feedback to hear what's going on. But it has been good. And so, yeah.
Very good. I'm guessing this one is for Brian. You mentioned registering as a lobbyist. Can you talk about that process? I'm assuming some of the folks on the call will understand that, but for those that don't, in your state anyways, how did that come to be?
In North Carolina, you have to register with our state secretary of state's office. You basically, and there has to be a principal that you're lobbying for. So what happens is our state association registers as a principal, and then I register as a lobbyist for that particular principal. The biggest thing associated with it is it costs $250 to register a principal, and it costs $250 to register a lobbyist. But then after that, we have to do quarterly reporting. Again, it's a little, most of the lobbyists, a lot of the lobbyists, I guess, in North Carolina and probably in many other states are professional lobbyists. So they may be, they may be registered with 10 or 15 different principals. With us, we don't have any other outside lobbying forces. We have 492 soil and water supervisors in North Carolina. We rely a lot on them because they have that personal connection with their local legislators. However, we feel having someone, a staff type person who's in Raleigh very frequently or in our state capital can be there when meetings are called kind of last minute and put a face with an association is beneficial. So typically I just register annually. It's not so there's goods and bads in this, okay? So and it's the same thing. It's kind of a good and bad. So when you register as a lobbyist in North Carolina, I don't know about other states, but you're unable to participate in any campaign events, and you're unable to make any contributions to any candidate. So it's a little bit of a catch-22. A lot of your friends like to see you at certain functions, which you can attend. But then on the other hand, you don't get a lot of requests for donations. So that's kind of maybe a good or bad. But yeah, that's pretty much. And so, but what we did is we consulted with a nonprofit attorney who basically kind of laid out to us that the IRS, the way they look at it with a 501c3 is roughly about 10% of your, if no more than 10% of your budget is utilized for lobbying efforts. Then you can still have a presence as a lobbyist with a 501c3. And in our state too, what a lot of people don't realize is when you use volunteers to lobby, like if we weren't registered as lobbyists, our soil and water supervisors, when they advocated or lobbied on our behalf, that really technically should be reported. However, if I'm a registered lobbyist, the volunteers no longer that part doesn't have to be reported. So the reporting actually shrinks down a lot. And not a lot of people do that. And I've never known the state to go after anybody for that. But if you're looking at the laws around lobbying, and there's still a lot of them I don't know. I try to err on the side of caution as much as possible. But it's been a pretty seamless process for us. Our Secretary of State's office is great to work with. And they send out reminders when you don't send in your quarterly report. There's a real short form. It's basically you're not spending any money. At the end of the year, we do a form just saying about how many hours I logged in my lobbying efforts, which are usually not very much. I spend a lot of my time in committees listening, and making sure that we're there in case a question comes up, or and then too, we get firsthand information of what was discussed in the committee, so we know kind of what directions to go when we leave. So.
Very well. Tamara or Heather, anything you want to add to that Texas perspective?
Sure. So we went a little bit kind of a different perspective or different path, if you will. And we actually created a C6. But all they do is pay for the hired lobbyist. Because that C6 entity can do that. And like I said, I mean, they have their meetings, they collect, but all that's done is pay them. And so that way we have that presence there, you know, all the time, that kind of thing. And don't have to work some of our reporting and then some of our capturing that time. And when we started looking at the capturing time and like paying for legislative days and things like that, we start bumping up to that cap real quick. And so we decided that that was probably the best avenue for us. I know all of those laws vary a little bit different, you know, state to state to state. And so, but we do have lobbyist hired. Mike, it's going to be kind of similar to what NACD has. We have two guys that strong ag background. One of them, his father, before he ran for the state legislature, was on his local soil and water conservation district board, you know, that kind of thing. So they have strong agricultural ties. And actually, we'll be there, you know, next week at our annual meeting to kind of give a legislative update, that kind of thing. So.
And C6 is a tax filing for membership associations that pay dues. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, it's just a
Okay.
different, it's slightly different than a C3, but it does allow them to have that lobbying effort. I know in Texas, you know, Texas Farm Bureau, Texas Southwestern Cattle Raisers, some of those bigger are C6s, and that's what allows them to have hire those lobbyists and have those lobbying efforts.
And this could be a question for you or Brian. There was something in the chat before about what is ACID? Is it new? Maybe, Brian, if you want to talk about the association, but also how many of your states have that? I believe California has a lobbyist also with their state association. Do you know how many have somebody in addition to that?
But Tamara, I'll just tell what I know. I know most states do have access to a lobbyist, and a lot of them do hire outside lobbying efforts. Most executive directors that I'm aware of do register, or a lot of them I do. No, they do register, but they rely pretty heavily on hired lobbyists. I don't know exactly how many that is, but I do. All the conversations I've had with my counterparts is they are all involved in the lobbying aspect, and I think that's the one thing the associations bring to the table to help our state partners and our federal partners is that ability to be able to do that. Tamara, I don't know if you know any more or not.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, not much help with that one. I apologize.
And Josh from
Tam-
Washington noted that Washington does have one, which I suspect too. Go ahead, Heather, if you're going to chime in on that.
Well, I was actually going to ask Tamara if she felt kind of like elaborating on how Texas actually, how we pay our lobbyists through that 501c, because there's a question in the chat about it that says, who pays the Texas 501c6 to pay the lobbyists?
The districts do, but they have to use their we call them trust accounts. It's their accounts that are their own funds. They can't use obviously any of their state funds to pay for that. And so they have to use their private dollars. They're assessed an annual dues and like I said, it's all just going to that association to pay those lobbyists.
And it looks
then-
like, oh, go ahead, Heather, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Mike. And then Ashley was asking how our lobbyists keep from confusing the messages if they lobby for other groups. And you know, from my perspective, our two lobbyists are heavily involved in ag, and there's not a lot of room for mix match there. But I would bet you would have something more concrete to say about that, right, Tamara?
Yes, also, so they have to disclose who all their clients are. And they also have to disclose any conflicts of interest, and they can be conflicted out. That, you know, an oil and gas versus an anti-oil and gas. That's just something that kind of popped in on my head here. And so they have to disclose conflicts of interest. They have to disclose who all of their clients are, you know, that kind of thing. So, and we're talking about, you know, funding for flood control structures a message that we're, one of the things that the state is looking for in their budget requests this year. Versus, I'm trying to think of who one of Todd's clients is actually, the alcohol industry. So that's a pretty simple message to keep, separate there, if that makes sense. They've got other clients, JP represents the dairy industry, some things like that. But we're also talking about an industry that we work well with on the conservation issues, and they see the need for soil and water conservation districts and that funding and that kind of thing. So it actually helps build that coalition of support for, different initiatives, activities, whether it's Farm Bureau and those different groups. That actually kind of helps build that. But like I said, we do have some pretty strict laws on the lobbyist side of disclosure. I think, Brian, you even mentioned that they have to say who they're, y'all have to file who you're representing and that kind of thing. And so, it all, yeah.
And one thing I'll say to kind of piggyback on what Tamara was talking about is, there's a lot of good to having people who know who you are lobbying for you if they've got some history there, especially if they got an ag background. But then you have some of those lobbyists who've been in it so long and they've got such good relationships. They pretty much walk in, ask for what they want. They've got that trust. It's kind of one of those, it's not what you know, it's just who knows you kind of thing. And we see a lot of that from a lot of our partners who have hired lobbyists too. Our biggest thing is, the cost of a lobbyist. They're not cheap. And and you get what you pay for, I think, in a lot of cases with that. So that's more of a reason probably we've gone down the path we have, aside from from hiring a paid lobbyist. But again, I think too, David's Department of Ag, they have a legislative liaison, which serves a lot of those same roles and purposes. And so I think with us having that support too with the department, I think we're able to function a little bit better without a paid lobbyist than if we did not have that. So that's kind of why we are where we are.
It certainly seems like every state's got a little bit different model. We saw that Vermont, Virginia, Wisconsin all have their executive director similar structure as Brian, and Alabama has a little bit of both. Their executive director also registered, but they have somebody else assisting. Good stuff. We're out of questions. Anything from our presenters, kind of final words or things you want to leave the group with? If not, I want to thank everybody for the time today. Definitely thank ACED for working with us on this series. Again, the next one is January 22nd. We'll have Oklahoma and Alabama presenting in that one. So we'll have the executive director and also somebody from the state agency. Brian, did you have anything else to add?
I was just going to mention, I think you asked a while ago, somebody asked what was ACED. I don't know if that was a question.
Yeah, go ahead and tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so most state, well, a lot of states now have an executive director for their association, and prior to us forming our formal Association of Conservation Executive Directors, which is actually an affiliate organization of NACD, we were able to establish that with a lot of help from Mike when he was with NACD. Appreciate that. But it's basically just an association of the executive directors from across the states and territories in the United States. That's kind of what we are. So. Thanks for
Fantastic. Yeah, and you have a website, correct, if folks want to find out more.
Yeah.
We'll definitely include that. Be on the lookout for more information about the January 22nd webinar that will deal with outreach to state leaders, but also federal outreach and how our folks are working together. I want to thank everybody again for today, and we'll catch you on the next webinar.